From the Free Press, this is Honestly, and I'm Bari Weiss. Sometimes we have a guest on this show who truly needs no introduction. You know Dana Perino. She took on the job of White House press secretary when President George W. Bush was at his most unpopular back in 2007 and 2008 as the Iraq war dragged on. She did not receive, suffice it to say, a warm welcome from those covering the White House. Outlets like the New Republic called her clueless, and she was even injured when an Iraqi journalist threw his shoes at the president. It was not an easy job, but as anyone who served in the White House press corps back then will tell you, she did it masterfully. Then she went on to Fox News, where Dana quickly became a fixture. Today, she co-hosts America's Newsroom in the morning and is the lead anchor of the highest-rated show on cable, Fox News' The Five, where she is both the moral arbiter and the straight man. Today on Honestly, I asked Dana about the moments of great tumult at Fox News and in news media more broadly. I asked her what she makes of Trump's media strategy, including the way the administration openly mocks deportees. But Dana's also pretty well known for being a mentor, and she has a new book out that allows those who don't know her to access that wisdom. It's called I Wish Someone Had Told Me, the best advice for building a great career and a meaningful life, which just hit bookstores. And it's full of practical advice, not just from Dana, but from her friends, including many of her colleagues. It covers everything from starting off at the workplace to keeping your career afloat during the ups and downs that inevitably come your way. She talks about how to stay healthy, keeping yourself financially secure, dealing with bad bosses and coworkers, handling your personal relationships, and the endless struggle of finding a work-life balance, something that I am learning by working with half of my family. From her time at Fox and Republican politics, Dana knows quite a bit about navigating through chaos and keeping your head above water and smiling a little bit in the meantime. You're going to learn a lot from this one. And because I cannot help myself, of course, we also talk about the news. Stay with us. Dana Perino, welcome to Honestly.
Thank you. I feel like I'm a stalker.
You're not.
But don't call security.
You're not a stalker.
No, I really am a huge fan of you and Nellie. And as I got to meet some of the other folks here, all the writers, I got to meet River Page.
Oh my God, it's an amazing byline. It's just a great name.
First of all, the name is brilliant.
Yeah.
I thought it was an actor. I was an early subscriber, and I love to give it as a gift. I think that it is one of the best things that has kept me more informed and smarter and also super entertained.
Well, I have to say, I have now met in the past decade of my life, but especially in the past few years, a lot of people that have a very shiny public persona and a very different personality in private. Let's just be generous about it and not say two-faced. You are probably the person who I think about. It's not only that your public persona and your private persona match and there's no gap, it's that the private Dana is even more like gracious and shining than the public one.
Oh,
and
thanks.
It's not surprising to me that you have this new book out that's really about advice for people's careers, for people's lives. It's called, what is it called, Dana?
It's called I Wish Someone Had Told Me. And it comes from my mom, who, when she read Everything Will Be Okay, Life Lessons for Young Women from a Former Young Woman, my mom read that book and she called me and said, I wish somebody had told me this. Because she started working in the 1960s, and that was when women were the pioneers, and they paved the way for the rest of us. And so that book was really geared towards young women and their quarter-life crisis. And then post-COVID, I felt like, you know what? We need a refresh. It almost feels like COVID was this moment where you stopped the computer, you know when you restart the computer.
Well, I remember restarting the computer.
I know I'm pushing the button in my mind.
Do we press a button? Yes, we still do. But my point is, you are a person who models gracious, frankly, just classy behavior. The kind of class that I think a lot of people have forgotten. And so not surprising to me that you would write a book giving people, I think, pretty fantastic advice that we're going to talk about for their career, for their life. Amazingly, you open a book that's presumably about career advice with advice about love, which I think is smart. I want to talk about that in a little bit. I want to start by just talking about you.
Tell us about like how you sort of came up in local news.
Well, I loved local news. I watched all of it. And I still do. When I go on vacation, if I'm like, let's just watch the local news and see what's happening. I love it all. But it has really diminished, and that's unfortunate. I worked at the PBS station on my college campus, so I covered the Colorado State Legislature. In graduate school, I covered the Illinois State Legislature, but I also covered other things. And at the time, instead of Wikipedia, I had 1-800-Media Line. And that's what you called in order to find out what jobs were available around the country. And as I was listening to this, I'm like, how do you...
Wait, I don't understand. They would literally just list jobs?
Yeah. So you
like
call,
local TV affiliate, Milwaukee.
That's exactly right. And then you'd have a code number.
What?
Push 5431 if you're interested in the job in Milwaukee.
Wow.
Yeah. No, this is how it was.
Wow.
It's before the internets and all those things. So, but it was pretty clear to me that the path to success was a hard one. And I didn't see how you could get ahead. And I also experienced media bias for the first time in my life in that newsroom in Illinois, in Springfield, Illinois. The Republicans had taken over for the first time in many, many moons. And I grew up in Wyoming and Colorado. I didn't really know that many people who didn't think the way I did, even though I thought we were pretty commonsensical, pretty libertarian, to be honest. And long story short, I called my dad and said, I think I just got a graduate degree in something I don't want to do. Thankfully, he said, come home.
What happened?
I went home, I was waiting tables, and then I heard about a job open in the State House as the deputy press secretary. Now, I used to watch the White House briefings. I used to watch the West Wing, and I thought, oh, deputy press secretary at the State House, and a congressman that I had interviewed before when I worked at the PBS station, I said, I wonder if I call them if they'd be a reference for me, because I knew they knew each other. When I called, the chief of staff said, oh, we come work for us. Now, I thought she meant go back to Pueblo, Colorado. And I was like, I'm not doing that. But it was in DC. And I sweated it for several days. One of the things I talk about is that your horizons at that age end here. And I thought, if I don't stay in TV, if I take this job and I move to Washington, D.C., and I work in the nation's capital, that's my path. I'm going to have to work in politics the rest of my life. But I decided to do it. I prayed about it, woke up one day, and was like, okay, God, this is what you want. 6 weeks later, I ended up getting a job as the press secretary to a congressman from Colorado. And then 2 years later, I was on an airplane and my life changed dramatically.
Tell us about that.
So I was 25. I very much wanted to meet somebody and to get married. And it just was not happening in DC. I mean, girls, am I right? It's not a good scene. The dating scene was not good back then. I don't think it's gotten much better. And
yeah, I mean, the internet's broken dating for literally everyone. But you have like such a analog story that you're about to tell of how you met someone, which I think is going to make a lot of people jealous, frankly.
Yeah, or maybe it'll hopefully give them hope.
Yeah, maybe.
So I had to go back to Colorado with the congressman. He's doing a round of media, do those things. And then I'm flying back to D.C., Denver, Chicago, D.C. I almost missed the flight. I was randomly seated next to a guy we were the last two people to get on the plane. It was an American Airlines flight of seats A and C. I was in A at the window seat. And I sit down and this British guy, older than me, says, would you like me to put your bag up above? Now, I'm only 5 feet tall.
Barely.
Ish. And I always need my bag so I can put my feet on it because my feet usually don't touch the ground or the floor. So back then, no AirPods, no phones, books. He had a book, The Tailor of Panama, by John le Carré. I was reading Beloved. Actually left it on the flight, never finished the last 3 chapters. Have no idea how it ends. But people talk about that book all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I read it mostly. And we talked for 2.5 hours. And I remember looking out the window and saying, all right, Lord, I know I asked you to help me find somebody, but we're on a plane. He lives in England. He's a lot older than me. He could be an ex-murderer. And how could this be happening? But I felt it. And 8 months later, I moved to England and we've been married 28 years.
So that is the kind of advice that those of us that sort of like grew up in the girl boss era, like that would have been the opposite of what we were told to do.
Me too.
Yeah. So how did you decide to ignore all of that?
Mostly, I knew I wanted to be with him. I loved him. I love him. I loved him deeply. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think straight. I was a wreck. And we decided we wanted to be together, but then I was like, what are people going to think about me? How is this my career could end? My career, I'm like looking back, I'm like,
I was 25.
I was a house press secretary. Like, not a big deal, but
it was to you.
I was really worried about what my parents would think of me and what my friends would think of me. And mostly it was about the age difference. And
he's about 20 years older.
18. Yep. And so I went home, and a family friend named Kim Wilkerson, she has since passed, but she took me aside. She goes, what's going on with this guy? So I told her my concerns, and she said, no. Do not give up on this chance to be loved. It might be the only chance you get. And so I built up the courage. I remember I was so nervous to tell my parents I was going to move to England, and they loved Peter, but I thought they're going to say, this is a bad choice, Dana. Be disappointed in me. I built up the courage, and I told them, and you know what they said? Amazing. This is so great. We're so happy for you. So all of that angst was for absolutely nothing. And it's a big lesson. Like, I worried away so much of my 20s, and I wish someone had told me not to, or if they did tell me, I wish I had listened. Because I look back and I think that's the one thing I hope for all young people listening to this. If you are an educated American, then you really only have to decide how hard you want to work, because everyone in the world would trade places with you in an instant. And when I look back on my career, my favorite piece of advice that I pass along is that choosing to be loved is not a career-limiting decision. I think you and Nellie would agree.
We would, but I mean,
that's not a career-limiting decision. I mean, you guys took risks and chances, and you're building a family, you're building an amazing business. And there are some people who will hesitate, and young women that will come to me over the years. There's this one, she was so nervous because her career was so great, and she worked in social media at Fox, but she was so in love. And she was in love with a guy who was going to be inheriting his dad's real estate business in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I said, you can go to him. It will be okay. And if it doesn't work out, you can come back. And
it's funny.
She's there now and mother of 3.
I just gave a piece of advice to someone who was debating to relocate for a job with us, dating someone somewhere else. And I'm like, choose the relationship. Like, that is far and away the most important decision of your life, if you think it's the one.
But also I would say this. Choosing the relationship does not have to mean the end of your dreams.
Of course not.
And in fact, I don't think I could have done any of this without Peter. I really don't.
Right, but I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I think maybe you will. I think that choice, the choice of the relationship and the who, is the single most important decision for life and for everything. For everything. It informs literally everything. I am lucky in that half of my family works here, so I don't have to think about things like work-life balance. They don't exist for me. I live in a borderless land where everything is work and everything is life, which would not work for most people. But I do think that, the decision to be with someone that wants you to, like, I've been in relationships where I felt like the world was shrinking. And then I've been in relationships where I feel like everything is like a great unfolding and opening up. And that's sort of always my test for people. Like, do you feel like your horizon is expanding or not expanding?
And keeping your eyes and ears open at all times for opportunities, not just career-wise, but also for relationships. I am concerned, and I talk about this, that especially post-COVID, a lot of young people are not getting out there. I don't mean just like going to a bar, but like, you have to make an investment. You have to go out and join a group or be a part of something where you are actually going to meet other humans and really invest in this time. And investing in yourself in your 20s, in a relationship or in your early 30s, I think is critically important. It doesn't mean it can't happen later. It certainly can. But what I find is that when somebody comes and asks me career advice, they always have sort of like Matlock at the very end. They're like, there's just one more thing. I'm like, and what's that? And they're like, how can I meet somebody that I can be with, that can give me joy to share this life with? And I say, well, what do you do Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And if they answer that honestly, so many of them are home.
Yeah.
Computer.
Yeah.
Watching reality TV. Like, it doesn't work, guys. You have to get out there. Now, that doesn't mean you might meet somebody on a plane. But now with phones and AirPods, and like, I've sat next to plenty of people on a plane I would never want to talk to either.
Right.
But I just mean having your eyes and ears open at all times and then being willing to make that leap is worth it.
Okay, so you go to England, you give up everything, you kind of can't work there.
Don't have a visa, and did not break the law.
Okay, because you're very law-abiding, Dana Perino. You probably are. You probably like never jaywalk.
Oh, I definitely jaywalk, but I look both ways 3 times.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Okay, so the I want to get to the period when you're press secretary and you're in the White House. You joined the Bush administration a little after 9/11. Am I right about that?
Just soon after I went to the Justice Department, and I was one of many spokespeople, but what a great job. What training that gave me. It was terrific.
Okay, so you're there, and one of the things you write about in the book is you were going to resign from the White House only then in the meeting where you're talking to your colleague. He says to you, actually, let me go first. We want to offer you the press secretary position.
Right.
Why were you going to resign, and why did you decide to take what was clearly already going to be a very high controversy, very high stress job?
So I'd been in the Bush administration for 6.5 years at that point. I was a deputy for Scott McClellan and then Tony Snow. And there were about 18, well, maybe a little bit more, maybe 20 months left in the Bush administration. And the chief of staff said, look, if you don't have fresh legs in order to finish this out, because the president intends to sprint to the finish, let us know now. And I remember talking to Peter saying, sprint to the finish. I'm like, I'm barely crawling here. I mean, they were, we were 18, 20-hour days. I was a deputy, and I loved that job so much. But it was pretty clear to me I was not going to become the press secretary. And I thought, maybe I should leave now, get my life back on track a little bit, and get a job, because I didn't come from money. I wasn't going to leave the White House and be like living off a trust fund.
Right.
I needed to like figure it out. And so Peter and I went on a trip where he was doing some crazy like hood to coast race. It's like a 24/7 race, and crazy, or 24-hour race. And on the flight back, we made a joint decision that yes, I would leave the White House. And he said, she's going to get her life back, and I'm going to get my wife back.
20-hour days. So
the next morning, I went in, I saw Ed Gillespie, and he was head of all comms. And I said, hey, can I see you after the 8:30? He goes, yeah, I need to talk to you too. I said, perfect. Okay, great. And I am dreading it because I love George W. Bush. I would do anything to have felt fresh enough to be there for him. And I didn't really want to leave, but I had made this decision with Peter, and I thought it was the right thing to do. Right? So my mind and my heart were at odds. And so comms meeting ends. Ed says, Dana, can you stay? So I'm sure people thought I was in trouble for something. So I sit down, and I was about to just blurt it out to get it over with, rip the Band-Aid off. And he goes, do you mind if I go first? I said, sure. And so I sat back, and he said, the president would like to name you the press secretary on Friday. And I said, great. What do we need to do to get ready? And I knew in that instant, my life was going to change dramatically, and that it was an opportunity as the first Republican woman press secretary that I would always cherish, be super grateful for, and I would always work to give back. And that's part of the mentoring piece of it all. Interestingly, Ed Gillespie didn't know that story until I wrote my first book. And he said, I had no ideas. I never told anyone. But I remember walking down the stairs of the West Wing, going to my office, closing the little pocket door, tiny office, and I called Peter, and he said, how'd it go? And I said, I'm going to be the press secretary. And bless him, he was like, congratulations, my darling. He was so happy. But our lives did change quite a lot.
How did they change? I mean, you've talked about how especially the last 6 months of it, you couldn't sleep without a pill. Talk about crawling. Like you could barely eat.
Yep.
Your back was.
I had an eye twitch. I had numbness from this elbow to this finger because of the BlackBerry use. I could write an entire press release on a BlackBerry with no mistakes. I was really good at it. But I do talk a lot about health and wellness in the book, because if I don't want the job again. But if I were to go back to be the press secretary, I would prioritize my health, because I would be a much better press secretary. And it's the only big advice I give to anyone who is going to be in that job. It's the one thing I really tell them, to make sure that you are especially eating healthy, drinking enough water. Like I basically existed off of green tea and Diet Coke.
Jesus.
And it was like a caffeine situation all the time. But I was on top of things. I could handle it all. But if I look back, I think I would have done better if I'd been more healthy.
But I mean, the president, it's sort of crazy to think back because it was less than 20 years ago, but it feels like another universe.
Yep.
The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were going on. The Bush lied, people died thing had already become a meme, although we didn't really talk about memes back then.
Nope.
I remember when the Iraqi journalist threw the shoe at Bush and ended up hitting you.
Well, I got hit by the steel arm of the boom mic. And I was the only one who really got hurt, except for the guy who threw the shoe.
What happened to him?
He had a bad day.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say, like, you were walking, you're such a sunny disposition, but like you were walking into a political context with, you'll remember the polling numbers, but just the vibes were not.
Well, I would say the financial crisis really for me was the one that was just like, that was really, really difficult.
The wars, the financial crisis, like how did you bear up, and what was the hardest thing about it?
I think a lot of it comes from the top, right? I worked for a leader who obviously was under a ton of pressure, but was a leader, decisive, and we were busy, and we were stressful, but we were joyous. And here's the thing, especially when it came to, for example, torture. Do you remember? I remember waking up one morning, and there was a story in the New York Times about how an operative had burned interrogation tapes. And I thought, oh, there's our lead. And I went in, and I'll never forget, I won't say who it wasn't the president, but I came into my office and he said, do you have a minute? This was right before the briefing. I was like, yes, but I had all my paperwork out, and I was like, what am I going to say? And it's legal, and thank God I had the DOJ training, because I'm like, oh, there's so much going on. And I'll never forget, he said, so in the days after 9/11, our president had to make a really tough decision. And it was really tough. And we had to ask our men and women to do some very difficult things. Really difficult. And I'm just here to tell you, I promise you, it saved lives. And I trust this person implicitly. And I said, I got it. And I went out and I had kind of the easiest briefing I'd ever had. And the reason is because I knew the ultimate decision had been correct. And I don't expect people to agree with this end decision, but can you respect the decision-making process? And can the reporters know that I know what the decision-making process was, and I did. Partly because I made sure, but also because President Bush was happy to have me there with him to be able to watch, learn, listen, pay attention. And I knew, and I'll tell you one story that I love, that I don't think I tell in the book, at least not in this one. There was a morning I woke up and all hell had broken loose in Iraq, and Maliki, the prime minister at the time, had sent troops into Basra to help protect the Sunni who were being persecuted by the Shia, and the British had lost control of the neighborhood. It had been a problem for quite a while. And Maliki overnight sent troops into Basra. And I have all these reporters. What's the president comment? What's he say? What's he say? And I'm like, guys, can you just let me wash my hair and I'll be there? Like, give me a second. This is all by email. And I remember everybody from CNN sent me an individual email, and I remember putting them all on one email, and I said, whoever emails me again from CNN is going to make sure that Fox gets this first. And then they're like, we're sorry. I'm like, stop sending me emails. Fast forward an hour, and I just felt so much pressure, and I said, look, President Bush stands with Prime Minister Maliki and reminds the world that this is exactly what he said he would never do. But he did it. And the president supports him. All of a sudden, these wire stories start coming out. Petraeus is furious with Maliki. Rice is mad at Maliki. Gates is mad at Maliki. Everybody's mad at Maliki. And I thought, I am going to get fired. I did something I usually wouldn't do. I was not cautious enough. I didn't double check. I didn't cross my T's and dot my I's. And I came downstairs. Peter's like, what's wrong? I said, I think I'm going to get fired. And we had to leave between 6:02 and 6:08 for me to get to the White House on time. So I got there. The National Security Advisor was not available to see me that morning as he had usually, because he was in the Situation Room dealing with the problem. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. I go into this senior staff meeting. Josh Bolten, chief of staff, late. Never happens in the Bush White House. He doesn't then come into the Roosevelt Room from his office. He comes from the Oval Office. And I'm like, well, here it comes. I'm going to get fired in front of everybody. And he doesn't sit down, and he says, I've just come from the Oval Office, and I'm here to tell you, if there's anybody in this room who has said that the president doesn't back Prime Minister Maliki, they are wrong, and correct it. And I had the AP Wire story printed out with me. And I said it. He's on record. He's okay. He can send this to the prime minister. Because he needed to have that trust with the prime minister. That the prime minister would know, yeah, you did a tough thing. You did the right thing. You sent your troops in to protect your people. That was the right thing to do. So I didn't get fired. 18 months later, we're doing the end of term interviews, and President Bush is asked by Charles Krauthammer, "Sir, when did you know that the surge was going to work?" And he thinks about it for a second and goes, Charles, that's a great question. I'd have to say it's the day that Maliki sent troops into Basra. He goes, and no one in my administration was with me except for Dana. And I was like, I cannot believe he remembered that.
Wow.
And that was the kind of bond that he and I had that a lot of press secretaries will have with their presidents.
It's pretty unbelievable, just in that story, to think back to the Republican Party as it was when you were working in politics, right? You're talking about a hawkish president who thought about America as the world's policeman. You're talking about...
Didn't initially, right? Remember, Ron says saying, we're not going to do that.
Okay, but broadly speaking, okay, we're not really thinking about pulling back from the world. No. Certainly at the...
when he ran on that in 2000, yes, but then 9/11 happened and it changed his thinking, for sure.
Okay. Free marketeer.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Compassionate conservative.
Free trade.
Immigration. I mean, how did
Education, that was a big one.
How did we go from there to here?
For me, it's very interesting to live through a political realignment. I worked with a lot of people in the Bush White House who had been Democrats in the early part of their careers, and then through Reagan became staunch Republicans. And we're kind of living through that now. And I watch these younger generations who are now very conservative. But also, if you think about during that time, in January 2008, when I left the White House, I did not have a Twitter account or a Facebook account.
I mean, it's...
Okay, so that has changed so dramatically. Mike McCurry was the press secretary who first let cameras into the briefing room. And do you know what day he did that on? It just so happened to be the day that the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke. And he always thinks, wow, maybe I shouldn't have let the cameras in. Wow. But it was kind of inevitable, and the communications has changed so much. And so living through the political realignment is fascinating to me. I look back and remember George W. Bush was the one who said, perhaps maybe we could allow people to take a little bit of their Social Security investment and invest it for themselves. Like maybe we could maybe do that. And I believe that when that problem does get solved, and it will have to, whatever it looks like, it's going to look a lot like what he suggested in 2005. But the Republican Party was so afraid to talk about Social Security reform at that time that they were so far behind him you couldn't see him. And then you have Barack Obama, you have Obamacare, you have the Tea Party, and then you have somebody that is an incredible talent who has amassed a huge amount of popularity and power in Donald Trump. And I actually believe that Donald Trump's election in 2016 was not the aberration, but that Joe Biden winning in 2020 was the aberration because of COVID. And that it was going in this direction. I don't know how it turns out in the end, but if you just watch the Democrats flailing, the fact that Biden won and then they did the big cover-up, to me, the cover-up meaning about Biden's acuity and capabilities, they ruined the Democratic Party for possibly a generation.
One thing that you're talking about BlackBerries and how there wasn't really Wikipedia. Thinking about the way comms used to work out of official Washington and certainly the White House, and the way it works now and what people expect and look for is just totally diametrically opposed, right? Before your era, polish, precision, rehearsed, disciplined. Now when we see those things, not all of us, it's boring, it seems canned, it seems inauthentic. Not authentic.
Yeah, true.
What feels authentic is looking at J.D. Vance's Twitter or Trump's Truth Social. Yep. Do you think that that's here to stay?
Yes.
Never going away?
I think of it this way. I love, one of my favorite classes in college was the history of journalism. And so I just kind of think about this. FDR, he's got the radio. And now he can speak directly to you in your ears. And that's still a very intimate thing. People like podcasts. because they think that they're sitting here having a conversation with us, and thankful that they listen. He has the radio. JFK sort of figures out TV, but Reagan perfects it. I would say that Obama was the first to figure out how to campaign using social media, but Donald Trump is the one who figured out how to lead by social media. And so he figured that out. What comes next? We don't know. But in order to talk directly to the American people, that is here to stay.
One of the things that I think is pretty astonishing, even for those of us that have gotten used to the way that Trump communicates, is the way that this particular White House under Stephen Chung communicates, thinking about things like the ASMR video of arrested migrants and like the sounds of their chains. I'm thinking about this weeping woman, I think she was a fentanyl dealer, but waiting to be deported, a really kind of horrific image, and that getting turned into a Studio Ghibli style ChatGPT meme. Peter Baker of the New York Times made a comment recently that if the images from Abu Ghraib came out today, the White House might have tweeted them approvingly.
Ooh.
What do you? It's pretty strong statement.
I mean, I remember that night watching 60 Minutes when they did the Abu Ghraib report and thinking I was working on the White House Council on Environmental Quality at the time, so I didn't really have any say in the comms writ large. But I can't imagine that. But it is different.
But even think about Kristi Noem in front of the cells, the prison, and it's like, what do you make of this style? I'll put it very neutrally. What do you think of this style of communications that's coming out of this White House? What's behind it? Like, do you think it's
persuasive?
Do you think it's persuasive? Do you think it's strategic? Is this all just sort of, in a way, mimetic and imitative of Trump himself? Like, what's going on?
It is impressive, and I do think for many people it is persuasive, but it also has the ability to be so offensive to people that it will just make them want to like lie down on the ground and cry. They are so much better at it than the Biden team ever thought of being. And sometimes the people who win in technology are the ones who get there first. The Free Press is a good example of that. There will be imitations of you went from the New York Times to a Substack to a company like that. Like the media is changing so much. And I work at a place at Fox where, I have this book and I'm like, I could be on Fox Nation. I can be on Fox Business. I'll do Fox News Digital. I'll do Fox News Podcasts with all my shows. Like all the things that are available to us as communicators. But in some ways also, there's just very few people all watching the same thing. So then we don't have any sort of common ground. On the White House, using those videos, I think that they just got there first. And they're good at it. And they're smart about it. I don't know if it's always in the best taste, but I do say it is pretty effective for not only reaffirming for people who support them, but for making sure it drives your enemies crazy.
Yeah.
Or I should say opponents, not enemies.
Well, it's definitely, I would say
it's provocative.
It's very, very, very provocative. Do you know Stephen Chung?
I don't. I don't know him. I hear great things. I hear that he's a very nice and kind person. I have been able to get to know Caroline Levitt a little bit more.
What do you think of her?
I love what my mom said about her. She said, she's a pistol.
Yeah, she is.
At 27, super smart, self-assured. She's more self-deprecating in person that might come across. I also loved the other day when Peter Navarro and Elon Musk were having their argument on X. And when she went
Peter Ritardo.
Yes, and she went to the podium and was asked about it, and she goes, well, boys will be boys. And she, I believe, has 3 or 4 older brothers. And I typically will never weigh in on something, but I did send her a text like, that's a great line.
Yeah.
That was funny. And one of the things that she can do is she can be a little softer than Trump, and she can bring a little bit of lightness when she wants. And I think that really helps. Plus, I haven't raised children, and I think that having a young mother in that job is very interesting.
How would you rate how he's done so far?
I would say incomplete, but when you look at, again, like what they would love to be talking about is the fact that the border is solved. That is a remarkable
So why aren't they just
achievement.
talking about that all day, every day?
I think that kind of part of the other thing is that in the press, right? When all the planes land safely at LaGuardia.
There's not news.
There's not news. But also, I remember Karine Jean-Pierre would be at the podium saying, the border is closed. And we'd have a split screen with Bill Malhusian at the border. And you have thousands of people just streaming across. It was just like the video. So if you put a video right now, a camera at Eagle Pass, Texas, it's a beautiful landscape. There's nobody coming across. So there's not much visual to show. And I don't know how they would have to get creative in how to show that visually. I think remains to be seen how this fight over the deportations ends. We're in the middle of it. I don't exactly know. The other thing is that high prices, it's still an issue. Those are the number one and two, sometimes tied issues in the campaign. Inflation and the border. The border is solved. Except for now we have to figure out a way to deal with the back end of all of that. That will come. Prices, I think, will be a little bit different. However, I've started looking. The numbers are down a little bit, but the people who voted for Trump and support him are giving him some time. Mm-hmm. And he has built up a lot of capital in his political bank, and he's spending it a little bit now and then, and he believes that it's going to work out in the favor of the economy. I hope that's true. I have remained a skeptic on tariffs. I've said that from the beginning. So I would say incomplete. The first 100 days, to me, is not as important as the second 100 days. That's where it gets harder.
You're obviously not going to go back and work in the White House, as you have made clear. Don't want to go back in time.
That's for younger people.
But how would you advise the Trump administration, forgetting policy, just on communication strategy?
Here's one thing I would say that's just a practical point. I know that the current administration has very strong feelings about the press. I was saying that sometimes we just hated the press behind the scenes. They hate them openly and
banning the Associated Press and a number of things that have happened.
There are things that I wouldn't necessarily do, but here's one practical thing I think that they could do and that I would say publicly on the Five or anything. If they call me for my advice privately, Caroline, I will keep that private. But this is what I would say. I read a ton. I read it all. And I am a little bit surprised, and I think that they are missing many, many opportunities by how many articles I read that says the White House didn't return call for comment. Mm-hmm. And then after the article runs, then they trash the publication. Now, I just don't think that is necessarily the best way to spend your political capital or your capital with the media. I would think that everybody has a job to do here. They have a job to do, and the reporters have a job to do. And to be honest, they do well. When somebody in the New York Times can have a story that says, this is what the White House says, I go, okay, well, that makes sense, right? I think that they would be better served by trying to get into those stories more often than they are right now.
We're in a really strange moment where trust, in a million ways, but just speaking for the media, where the places that we used to think of as mainstream don't actually represent the American mainstream, and they've lost a tremendous amount of trust. Then there's sort of the Wild West world of podcasting, mostly dominated by Joe Rogan as the biggest member of that group. But it's just, huge
group. You in that group.
Sure. But just tons, Cambrian explosion of podcasts, Substacks, et cetera. And I think one of the most interesting conversations happening there is the question of gatekeeping, right? Because one of the, I think, big takeaways from COVID, or at least media coverage of COVID or media coverage of BLM, was the gatekeepers weren't telling us the truth. Right. They weren't asking the real questions. And not only were they not asking the real questions and sort of seeing their own curiosity as a liability, they were actively suppressing things that went against their own political interests. So how can we ever trust gatekeepers? The problem is that in this free sort of Wild West world, there's no gatekeeping at all. And so the view of someone who is an out-and-out conspiracy theorist that doesn't believe the moon landing happened or thinks that vaccines make you gay or whatever is treated often with the same level of seriousness as someone who actually knows something. Mm-hmm. Do you think that will inevitably just burn itself out? Like, is there a role for gatekeeping, for example, on Fox? You guys don't just... I'm sure a lot of people that watch MSNBC will say they just have anyone on, including those free press people. Mm-hmm. But you guys are very particular about the kinds of people I imagine that you decide to have on. How do you think through that theme? How do you think through the question of who to platform
I would
or not?
speak for, so on the 5, we don't have guests. We just have a roundtable of people who, for some reason, this show is the #1 show in all of cable.
I know.
And we've been on air for 14 years in Gutfeld, and I look at each other and think, can you believe this? Like, we never thought that it would be. But let me just speak for America's Newsroom. This is the first big news show out of the day, every day. I love doing it with Bill Hemmer. He's such a professional and so great at breaking news. Today is the day, unfortunately, we had to do coverage of the Pope passing. And who do you call upon? Cardinal Dolan. People could pretty much still have faith in Cardinal Dolan for a good reason. So you could find a guest like that. Sometimes you'll have a panel, right? So you'll say, well, there's 2 points of view on here. Can we have Andy McCarthy and Jonathan Turley on, and they can argue it out? Mm-hmm. I think that's often very important. The other thing that we try to do as well is to utilize our contributors. I mean, it takes a lot to become a Fox News contributor. That's a high bar. But once you clear it, it is something that is a big responsibility. So we try to use them as well. And then in addition to that, like I look for other people. For example, this weekend, the Wall Street Journal ran a big piece by Annie Linsky about Biden and the cover-up. And Emma Tucker, the editor of the Wall Street Journal, she had suggested this piece because Annie Linsky wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal last June, 3 weeks before the debate between Trump and Biden. She had over 40 sources.
She was trashed for it.
By people in the media, including Morning Joe, et cetera, and by people at the White House. Andrew Bates said terrible things about her. And she was right. And so I was reading that on Saturday, and I said, we should give her a chance to come back on. And she's so nice. She wouldn't, she's not going to say, I told you so. But it is a thing where you're thinking, the media also knew that Biden wasn't great. They knew the border wasn't secure. They knew that inflation was actually happening. And then they seemed surprised that Trump won.
Do you think that this is one of the reasons that Fox is doing? I mean, I just pulled some stats that's kind of unbelievable. Fox has almost quadruple CNN's viewers and double MSNBC's. It is, I think this is the thing that's most surprising. It's dominating viewership among young people, including Democrats. More Democrats watch Fox than MSNBC and CNN combined. The #1 late night show is Gutfeld's show. Like, what's going on here? Because after, and we don't have time to get into Roger Ailes and the harassment and all that, but I think after Roger Ailes left the scene, there was a sense of like, he's the genius. How are they going to keep it up after that? And I don't think that there was any idea that Fox could be winning over young people and liberals. What's going on?
I wish I could say, here's the secret sauce and let's bottle it up and let's sell it, but we can't. I would say that, for example, yes, Roger Ailes, brilliant at what he did. But who came up with the 5? And that was Suzanne Scott. And she's the CEO of Fox News. And this is a woman who is the most powerful woman in media by far. Asks for no attention, does not raise her hand for a big profile, doesn't ask for anything like that. But she's the one who said, Shannon Bream, I see a path for her. And let's lay this out so she can become the host of Fox News Sunday. Jesse Waters. I think we could put him here. Let's put him here and then here. Greg Gutfeld. He and I started together on the 5. He had a show called Red Eye. Now he's the #1 show, as you said, the #1 comedy show at night, often beating some of our own shows. Like, kind of we just compete against each other now. I'm a great example. I was terrible when I first started as a contributor, but I had credibility and I had goals. And once I got over my shyness of being able to be me, then she was like, what about this? What about the solo show? What about putting her with Hemmer? What about maybe putting her on election night? And I am so blessed with opportunities right now. I would say that I'm actually kind of just surprised that I've been there that long. I've never worked at a place that long. I'm like, I've been there 15 years.
Right.
And for the first time in my life, I'm not worried about what's next. I'm kind of excited about what's next, but I have no idea what that will be. I think our viewers have a lot to do with it. But as you say, we have new viewers. Last 4th of July, I got a tap on my shoulder, and it was this group of young, good-looking guys home from college, and they were at this party on the beach where we were listening to this band. And they said, hi, could we get a picture with you? I was like, oh, your grandpas are probably fans. They're like, we're the fans. And that was different. And I thought, wow, something's happening here. And I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it is maybe part of this political realignment.
The conventional wisdom if you talk to anyone who does a new media company, and really most people, is cable news is dead, cable news is dead. You hear it all day long. Are they wrong?
I think cable news is not dead. I think news is not dead, but the way people get their news is changing rapidly.
You talk in the book about having a moral code and how that has saved you and can save other people from unnecessary anxiety and drama. What is that moral code? Have you had it since you were a little kid?
Probably, yeah. My family was ranchers, and my grandfather and grandmother had a really big influence on my life. I grew up in the Lutheran church. You're right, I'm a rule follower, pretty much. But I also just kind of want to do the right thing. I'm probably one of those people who very much cares way too much about what people think about me, and I really want people to like me. I actually was kind of pretty shocking for when social media started showing that there were some people who didn't. I was like, what?
Yeah.
What? How dare you? How dare you say this to me, right? But a lot of those were bots. And so that was eye-opening. But this is what I would say. I find life to be easier if you have a set of principles that you live by, and that helps you make decisions.
What are yours?
Well, one of them, this is actually not like a moral code, but time management is super important. And for example, I will not go to a baby shower. I hate going to baby showers.
Love that, Dana.
It takes all day long. And I got caught in a white lie. It was a lie. That I couldn't go to my friend's baby shower. This is when I worked at the White House. I said, it's because the president, I'm not able to come because of this, whatever, with the president. And I got caught. And I was in the green room.
Did she confront you?
Well, she said, we'll change the date for you.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, no, I don't want to go. And right at that time, President Bush was giving a speech that I'd heard many times before. It was his stump speech. And I was in the green room, and the sound was pumped in. And he was talking about how when you're president, if you have a set of principles, it makes it easier to make decisions. Like, you're either with us or you're against us. Pretty simple. So I said, I need a principle. I don't go to baby showers.
I love that.
Yeah.
What else is in the moral code? I mean, one of them in your book that stuck out to me, it's maybe a tertiary point, but you like the idea of tipping people in a restaurant at breakfast, especially 30% at least.
Yeah. So I reread the book this weekend, and that I was like, first of all, I thought, wow, it actually turned out pretty good. But I reread that advice, and Peter says he remembers that from our first weekend when we were together after we met on the airplane. We went to breakfast, and he went to pay, and I said, make sure you double the tip. He said, why? I said, well, because waitresses at breakfast, they work just as hard as everyone else. And in fact, people are so particular at breakfast, the way they like their coffee, the way they want their eggs, their toast isn't just right. It's not just how their mom made it. And breakfast is so hard to serve. And the price point is so much lower than at dinner that you always should do double the tip or at least do 30%. That's. And I thought, I noticed it yesterday too, and I thought, I'm glad I put that in there.
I thought that was really, I mean, I just know that when I've been around people that tip really generously, it's like something that has always stuck with me. But you also used to wait tables, and that was sort of like
best job,
a critical part of it.
Best job. I loved it.
Okay, you talk in the book also about knowing when it's time to leave a job. I have my own experience with that. What advice would you give people that are listening about how to know when it's the right time to go?
So that's interesting because I left a job because I chose love. That was my first time doing that. I left a job because of 9/11. So that was a force event. I then left a job because the administration ended. And I've been at Fox ever since. I'm not a great person to ask. So what I did in this book is I asked people that I knew and trusted that had done something like that. And Trey Gowdy is a colleague of mine who had been a prosecutor, he'd been a congressman, and he decided to leave the leadership track in Congress. And I wanted to ask him, how did you know that it was time? I think his book, Start, Stay, or Leave, is one of the best books of decision-making I've ever read. It's excellent. So I wanted to ask him about that because it's really important. And another friend of mine, Michelle Chase, who is in the book, I asked her, how do you know? And she reminded me of a story that I learned, which is a girlfriend had an opportunity to go someplace else, but she was very happy in her job, very comfortable in her job. So she went to ask her girlfriend, what do you think about this new opportunity? I don't want to go work there. my job's so easy right now. She said, do you feel like you're nearly drowning every day? She goes, of course not. I'm comfortable. She goes, oh, then you have to leave. Because
too easy.
It's too easy. There's a time in your life for easy. But I also think that the other piece of advice I love in here is the idea that work-life balance is something that we all strive for, but you can't necessarily think of work-life balance every single day. Sometimes there's a season in your life. You're in the season of
everything.
18-hour days, 20-hour days. You wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're sending texts to Sean.
You got it, baby.
But
doesn't stop.
That is not going to be for the rest of your life.
I hope not.
Because you're making an investment.
Nellie, believe me, if it is.
It won't be. Because you guys will get established and you'll figure it out. And then you'll realize, what can I outsource? What can I let go of? The hardest thing, and I have this hard time too, is that I love everything I do. I love these opportunities. I would buy everybody's minutes if I could. It's how do you know when it's okay to say enough? And I think that Jill and Joe Biden made a terrible choice. They should have known when to leave. And I think the Democratic Party, we talk about a Republican realignment, the Democrats are in the middle of it right now too. And big time generationally.
But it's not clear where they're going to...
Have no idea.
And how they're going to exit the wilderness. With the Republicans, we know what it looks like. What that will look like post-Trump, I think, is a question. Dana, one of the things in this book, advice that I know I will never follow, is that you tell people to get a hobby to help with work-life balance. No way. I mean, we know that Bush and Churchill were both painters. Why is this good advice for a person working 18 to 20-hour days?
I should probably go back and amend, and in the paperback, maybe I will. I don't think you should have a hobby right now.
Like, I literally lie when people ask me what our hobbies are. Like, to live in this rental.
Raising children.
But like, we're living in this rental, and it's one of these buildings where you, like, they interview you to come. It's insane.
Oh, right.
And they were like, what do you guys do? Like,
wait, 5.
They were like, what have, like, your years been like in California? And, like, literally Nellie just, like, launches into lying about how we love going to the beach and we go hiking. I'm like, we've been on like we don't do anything other than the company and kids. But maybe I'll get a hobby later in life. But tell me why the hobby is important.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Churchill and Bush and painting, but that was in retirement.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So one of the things Bush
was not painting while in the White House.
Had never picked up a paintbrush, but he read a book that Winston Churchill had written about retirement, in which Churchill said, you have to have 3 hobbies. And for it to be an actual hobby, you have to take the lessons and you have to actually be doing, the practice and fulfilling it. One of Churchill's was painting. And President Bush thought, well, maybe I can do that. Turns out he's excellent. He took a lot of lessons, 3 or 4 days a week, paints every day. Now he's painting books. He has huge murals. It's unbelievable. He's so good at it. And so I do think that, especially for me at this time, when I have a really different kind of day where I do a morning show and a late afternoon, evening show, that I have this time in the middle of the day that I have to figure out a way to have some sort of thing that is a different muscle to exercise. And that could be in my brain, right? If I were to take music lessons or something. But for me, movement is really important. I can get really tense and stiff and tight, and I think I don't want to be that way. Like, I'd like to stay as flexible as possible. So finding a way to put my phone down for an hour or 90 minutes at a time, and then get back on 20 minutes, check emails, send a note, like do that, and then walk back to Fox, I listen to Commentary Magazine. Honestly, I listen to, your podcast, honestly. Maybe it's 3 Martini Lunch. Maybe it's Dan Senor, Call Me Back. I mean, I'm trying to listen all the time and always be learning. ABL, that's my sort of rule. Like, how can I be maximizing this time? And then on the weekends, I can have more fun.
Another piece of advice you give in this book is take all the vacation days you can. Mm-hmm. Help me. Tell me about that.
I'm not a great example of this, but you know who encourages us to do that at Fox is the CEO I mentioned, Suzanne Scott. I remember the day of the Uvalde shooting, I was on a plane getting ready to leave for a significant birthday. And I was going to Spain, and I was like, oh my gosh, should I get off? Should I go? Like, there's a big news. Should I go? And I got a note from her. I hadn't sent one to her, but she sent one to me. She goes, I know what you're thinking right now.
Wow.
And there will always be news. You have to go and refresh and come back, and we'll use every bit of you when you're back, but you have to go have a good time right now.
Wow. You seem to have a kind of very powerful internal engine that just gives you the ability to just go harder than most people. I don't want to say I'm a fatalist, but I've become much more of a people like have just these inborn engines or they don't. They have an inborn curiosity or they don't. They have, I'm married to someone with like a very high happiness set point. I don't have that. I'm much more up and down. How much of the kinds of advice you're giving do you feel is actionable? This voraciousness that you're expressing, like always be learning. It's like, I feel that way. That is a thing that I feel I was lucky to be born with. But was that nature? Was that my parents? I don't know. But it wasn't something that had to be taught. How much of the advice you're giving to people do you think is learnable?
That is such a great question because I was just thinking about my sister, who's younger than me, my biggest fan ever. I remember when I learned to read. She's 4 years younger. I learned to read, and she told everybody, my sister can read.
Oh.
And even to this day, like, she wants nothing to do with the press. She doesn't want to be, there's no traveling the world. There's no I'm going to be this, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to write that book, and then after I do that one, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to try this. I'm going to be... None of that. And she is one of the happiest people I've ever known in my life.
Do you think there's an inherent tension between ambition and happiness?
No.
Okay.
No. I think I would say when I'm not happy is when I feel stuck or if I'm like in a cul-de-sac. And my mom used to say, a bored Dana is not a happy Dana. And I don't know what it's like to parent somebody like that. I've not had children. And maybe as your children grow up, you'll find, oh, okay, this is what she wants to do. Okay. This is what I would say. For the young people that are coming to me for advice, it is learnable and actionable.
Because they even know to ask for advice.
Exactly. And I find one of the reasons I wrote this and the other books is because there is a supply and demand problem. It's out of balance when it comes to the appetite for guidance and advice from especially young people. But now the young people that used to come to me are now executives, managers, are becoming parents. So now their questions are different, which is why I said, let me ask some other people here what they think about this.
Okay, Dana Perino, are you ready for a lightning round?
Yes, I love lightning round.
Okay, you ready?
I will do it appropriately.
Okay, not worried about that. Your book is called I Wish Someone Had Told Me. What is the number one thing you wish someone had told you earlier?
Not to worry away my 20s.
What is the best piece of advice that George W. Bush ever gave you?
To ask myself when I'm considering an issue or a decision, what is the worst thing that could happen? And when you think it through, it's usually not that bad.
What do you consider your biggest accomplishment?
My marriage.
When you meet younger people who are considering dating someone with an age gap, what do you tell them?
Don't worry about what other people think because it almost derailed my relationship with Peter.
Is it true you would flip off reporters that you didn't like under the podium?
I would, yeah, especially if they were asking me a question that was annoying. It gave
like you would literally go like this?
I would hold the cup like this under the podium, and then I would just go like that. But they couldn't see me.
But did it psychically help you?
Yeah, gave me power.
When's the last time you talked to George W. Bush?
A month ago.
Do you think that he should be speaking out more in this political moment?
No, because he never wanted to. I remember when we did the interviews on the way out, and I'd say, oh, sir, Barry's going to ask you what you think your legacy will be. And I remember he would say, I can't think about it. I don't know. Last year I read 3 books about George Washington, and if they're still trying to figure out the first president, then the 43rd doesn't have a lot to worry about because he'll never know. He did not want the Klieg lights afterwards, and I think it would not be authentic to him if he were to come out and speak right now. It's just not in his nature. He doesn't want to do it.
Describe the late Roger Ailes in 3 words.
Bigger than life.
Perfect. Is it true that he used to call the 5 the 10 because he always had someone to replace you guys with?
I've never heard that.
Okay, I heard that. Is it not true?
I have no idea. I've never heard that. To this day, to this moment, I always feel replaceable at any moment. And I think that's a good way to feel because it makes you be better.
Okay, Dana, one of the things I can't imagine about your life is the wake-up time. What time do you get up in the morning?
4:45.
What is your morning routine?
I wake up, I pray, and then I sit up and I start reading the news. Now, I usually do a lot of prep the night before. So mostly what I'm looking for in those next 15 minutes is what is different, what is new, and what do I need to ask to be printed for the preparation. Or maybe it's something like, I really want to read this, but it doesn't have anything to do with the show.
Save it.
I can read it later, but I'll print those. I don't print everything. And I send those to my assistant. And then I do some sort of movement. I have a Peloton at home. So I either do some Peloton, some weights, some yoga, and then quick shower. And then, of course, I don't have to do my own hair and makeup. So that saves time.
Yes.
And then there's a phone call at 6:45 where Hemmer and our executive producer, we all get on the phone and go through Newsroom. And then I leave the house at 7:05, 7:10. I'm at the office by 7:20 and at hair and makeup at 8.
Are you exhausted by the time it's like 7 p.m.? How do you do this? And are you naturally a morning person?
Naturally a morning person for sure. Like I would love to do anything in the morning. I wake up happy. I wake up ready to go. I have 100. You know what? My dog wakes up happy too. I'm always like, yes, Percy, yes, the morning is going to be great. Peter's a little bit more slow to roll.
What time do you go to sleep?
I make myself go to the bedroom at 9 p.m.
Okay.
My goal is to be asleep between 9:30 and 9:45.
Okay. So it's
But I try
reasonable.
not to look at my phone after 9 p.m.
Dana, people have encouraged you to run for office because they think you'd be great at it and because you have a big following. Do you agree with them that you'd be great at it?
I think I'd be terrible.
Why?
I believe, as Condi Rice told me, this was the best advice I ever got, or best description I ever got. She was on the campaign trail with George W. Bush in 2004 because she was the national security advisor. And she said it was amazing. They'd get up at 6, they'd have their first meeting at 6:30. That was the briefing. And the president was ready to go. And then he'd go to this meeting and the town hall, and then he'd have a debate, then he'd have an interview, then they'd have a dinner, a fundraiser, a rally, and then they'd have the end of day meeting at 9 o'clock. And President Bush was like, yeah, let's go. And it fed him. And she was exhausted.
I mean, that is exhausting.
And I'm more in that category. Not exhausted, but...
Is it the code switching that you're asking your brain to do? Is that the exhausting part?
I think it's the... I think it's the interaction with people. It's not that I'm not an extrovert, because I obviously think that I am, but I do like to be quiet. I need time to think.
What is the best non-Fox News show, in your view?
Since I was a little kid and I was so afraid to go outside and play on Sunday night, because I was going to
60 minutes.
If I was going to miss 60 minutes. And to this day, when I hear that, tick, 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 I'm like, oh, it's time to go. It's 60 minutes. Now, Gutfeld says, that was the worst sound ever. It meant school was the next day.
That's so true.
But I loved it. And to this day, I will watch it. And a lot of times I like their feature stories as well. And it drives news the next day.
How many hours a day do you spend on X, formerly known as Twitter?
Not as much as I used to. I don't find it as useful as it was from a news gathering perspective.
Post Elon. I find that.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people left it, and I think the algorithm for me is a little bit off. I have different categories that help me, but I mean, it is the thing I am on the most for news gathering, but I don't find it as helpful as it used to be.
Democrats are rudderless at the moment. We've referenced that a little bit in this conversation. If you had to make a bet on who is going to be the candidate in 2028, who would it be?
It will be a governor. I don't know which one. I don't think it will be Newsom, and it probably won't be Shapiro.
Do you think Donald Trump is going to try and go for a third term?
No.
Do you think J.D. Vance will be the nominee?
I think that is a strong possibility, but I also think that politics has a way of surprising. So I'm not positive, but I would say 65% likely.
One of the things that Roger Ailes was known for talking about is how the media, I'm going to butcher it, obviously. I'm sure he said it in a very concise and funny way, but that the media in America is center-left, but America's a center-right country.
That's right.
Do you think that's why Fox is thriving right now, that there's sort of an alignment between where Americans actually are and what they're choosing to watch?
Yes, and I think that Donald Trump has captured the word common sense, and that's where most people are. Mm-hmm. And it's brilliant, the use of that word. He didn't really use it too much on the campaign trail. He's used it a lot in the first 100 days, and I bet you continue to see it because it is corralling most people into the majority.
We're talking the day after the Pope has died, and one of the questions I always love to ask people in these is, and you've mentioned prayer, do you believe in God? I know that that's a yes for you. So I'll ask you, what is your favorite Bible verse or character and why?
Well, I love the Serenity Prayer, which is, God grant me the wisdom to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It is very freeing. It gives you a chance to realize, okay, what's in my control? What is not? Can I let that go? And my goal in life, and part of the reason I wrote this, is for people to reach that moment of serenity where they're like, okay, everything is just as it's supposed to be in this moment. Those are rare glimpses that you get, little moments of your life. You probably remember them when they happen because they're so profound. And I think that's what God wants us to be able to glimpse for the future, for the afterlife.
Dana Perino, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.